The first thing he felt wasn't the pain. It was the heat. A white-hot poker driven clean through his side, searing flesh and bone. Then came the impact, throwing him from his horse like a child's doll. He landed hard in the ochre dust, the world a dizzying smear of blue sky and red rock. As his vision swam back into focus, he saw her, the Apache girl, her dark eyes wide with a terror that mirrored his own. Her name was Nita. He'd die for her. He knew that now. The question that echoed in the sudden ringing silence was Mhahu. Why? What ghost from his own past was he trying to bury here in the unforgiving sun of the Arizona Territory? The chase had lasted the better part of 2 days. It began in the scrubland south of the Gila River and pushed relentlessly north into the jagged, sun-scorched teeth of the Superstition Mountains. Jedediah Jed Stone had seen the buzzards circling first, a slow, patient vortex in the vast, indifferent sky. Then he saw the dust cloud, small and frantic, kicked up by a single desperate pony. He'd been riding line for the last 3 weeks, checking the Prentice Ranch's northernmost fences, a monotonous job that suited his desire for solitude. The world in his experience was a place best observed from a distance. But the dust cloud was wrong. It wasn't the lazy plume of a lone rider or the steady haze of a few head of stray cattle. It was the signature of a hunt. Curiosity and instinct he'd long tried to suppress got the better of him. He nudged his buckskin Dusty towards a high mesa that offered a commanding view. Through his field glasses, the scene snapped into sharp, brutal focus. A young girl, her dark hair flying, clung to the back of a straining pony. She couldn't have been more than 12. Apache by the look of her dress and the frantic way she handled her mount. Pursuing her were 3 riders, white men, their faces grim under the brims of their sweat-stained hats. They weren't pushing their horses, just herding her, cutting off any chance of escape, toying with her, like coyotes with a rabbit. A cold knot formed in Jed's stomach. He'd seen this kind of sport before. It never ended well. He was no lawman, no knight-errant. He was just a man trying to outrun his own shadow. But the sight of the girl, so small and so alone, lit a fuse on a powder keg of memories he kept chained in the cellar of his soul. He remembered another girl with hair the color of corn silk and eyes as blue as a prairie sky. He remembered his failure to protect her. Damn it all to hell, he muttered the words, tasting like ash. He wasn't given a choice. His conscience, long dormant, had made it for him. He spurred Dusty down the treacherous slope, taking a line that would intercept them in a narrow, rock-strewn canyon. It was a fool's play, 1 against 3, but it was the only one he had. He checked his Colt Peacemaker, the grip smooth and familiar in his palm. He drew his Winchester from its scabbard, the oiled steel cool and reassuring. He rode into the canyon's mouth and dismounted, using a cluster of boulders for cover. He weighted his heart, a slow, heavy drum against his ribs. The girl's pony clattered into view first, its sides heaving foam flying from its mouth. The girl Nita saw him, and her eyes widened in a fresh wave of fear. He raised a hand, a gesture he hoped looked calming. Then the riders appeared, led by a big bearded man with a face like a slab of granite. He rode a powerful black charger and carried a Spencer rifle like it was an extension of his arm. The other 2 were leaner, younger, with the cruel, eager faces of men who enjoy their work. "That's far enough, fellas." Jed's voice boomed, bouncing off the canyon walls. It was deeper and steadier than he felt. The 3 men pulled up short, surprised. The big man Fletcher narrowed his eyes. This ain't your concern, Cowboy. Ride on. Seems to be my concern now, Jed said, keeping the Winchester leveled. The girl. Let her go. Fletcher chuckled, a low, rumbling sound that held no humor. This here is stolen property we're recovering. Chiricahua property. Now you can walk away and live, or you can stay and join her in the dirt. Your choice. Jed's gaze flickered to Nita. She had slid from her pony and was huddled behind a rock watching him. In her eyes, he saw not just fear, but a flicker of something else. Defiance. She wasn't stolen property. I don't see a brand on her, Jed said, his voice dropping to a dangerous calm. Fletcher's face hardened. Last chance, old man. The world seemed to slow down. Jed saw the flicker of movement as the rider on the right went for his pistol. Jed's Colt was in his hand before the man's gun cleared leather. The roar of the peacemaker was deafening in the enclosed space. The rider jerked a look of stunned disbelief on his face and toppled sideways from his saddle. The canyon exploded in gunfire. A bullet whined past Jed's ear, chipping stone from the boulder beside him. He fired the Winchester, the recoil jarring his shoulder, and the second rider cried out, clutching his arm as his horse reared and bolted. But Fletcher was a different breed. He wasn't panicked. He was methodical. While Jed was focused on the other two, Fletcher had dismounted, using his own horse for cover. He raised the Spencer rifle. Jed saw the movement too late. He tried to duck back to find better cover, but he knew he wouldn't make it. He thought of his daughter Sarah in that final stretched-out second. He saw her face laughing in a field of wildflowers. Then came the fire. The .56 caliber slug hit him in the left side, just below the ribs. It felt like a physical blow from a sledgehammer, lifting him off his feet and slamming him against the rock wall. The air rushed out of his lungs in a pained grunt. His Winchester clattered to the ground. He slid down the rock face, leaving a wet, dark smear behind, and crumpled into the dust. Through a haze of shock and agony, he saw Fletcher step out from behind his horse, the rifle smoking. He began to walk towards Nita, a grim smile on his face. "No!" Jed gasped the word, a faint whisper. He tried to reach for his Colt, but his arm felt like it was filled with lead. His fingers wouldn't obey. Suddenly, Nita darted from her cover. She didn't run away. She ran towards Fletcher, a small skinning knife clutched in her hand, a fierce war cry erupting from her throat. The move was so unexpected, so suicidally brave, that it startled Fletcher. He took a half step back, raising his rifle to club her down. That half step was all the time Dusty needed. Jed's buckskin, fiercely loyal and trained to react to threats, charged forward, head lowered. The horse slammed into Fletcher, who bellowed in rage and pain as he was knocked off his feet. His rifle flew from his grasp. Nita didn't hesitate. She scooped up the heavy Spencer rifle, stumbling under its weight, and scrambled back towards Jed. Dusty, snorting and stamping, stood guard over them, his ears pinned back a warning to the injured rider, who was now struggling to his feet and running off into the rocks. Fletcher roared, clutching a bruised arm and glaring at them with pure hatred. He saw the situation for what it was, a standoff he could no longer win. He spat a curse on the ground. "This ain't over, Cowboy," he snarled, his voice a venomous promise. "That girl is mine. I'll track you to the gates of hell." He limped back to his horse, mounted, and rode away, disappearing back down the canyon the way he'd come. Silence descended once more, broken only by the whistling of the wind and Jed's ragged, shallow breaths. Nita rushed to his side, the big rifle discarded. She knelt in the dust, her small hands hovering over the bloody, torn fabric of his shirt, her face a mask of desperation. The pain was a living thing now, a clawed beast tearing at his insides. The edges of his vision were turning grey. He could feel the life draining out of him, pooling in the hot dust beneath him. He looked at the girl, this Apache child he barely knew, and saw the tears tracing clean paths through the grime on her cheeks. He had saved her for now. But as the world began to fade to black, he knew Fletcher would be back. And he knew with a certainty that chilled him more than the blood loss, that he wouldn't be alive to see it. He had bought her a little time paid for, with his last breath. And now they were alone. The world became a tapestry of pain and fevered dreams. Jed drifted in a grey, disorienting sea consciousness, a distant shore he could only occasionally reach. Time lost all meaning. There were moments of blinding clarity, the canyon walls sharp against the sky, Nita's worried face hovering above him. Then the tide of delirium would pull him back under into the haunted corridors of his past. He was back in Colorado years ago. The air was crisp with the scent of pine and the promise of snow. His wife Martha was humming on the porch of their small homestead, her belly swollen with their first child. He saw the simple joy in her eyes, a joy he had taken for granted, a joy he had ultimately shattered. The memory dissolved, replaced by another darker one. The acrid smell of gunpowder, the screams of women and children, the sight of blue-coated soldiers riding through a Cheyenne camp. He was one of them, a young scout swept up in a tide of vengeance and misdirected orders. He hadn't fired his weapon that day at Sand Creek. But his silence, his presence, had been its own form of damnation. The guilt was a brand on his soul, a wound far deeper than the one Fletcher had given him. He would surface from these nightmares, gasping, his body drenched in sweat. And each time Nita was there. She was no longer just a frightened child. A grim purpose had settled over her. She had dragged him somehow into the deeper shade of an overhanging ledge. She'd used her own knife to cut away the bloody fabric of his shirt, her touch surprisingly gentle. He watched as if from a great distance as she worked. She built a small fire, using the flint and steel from his own saddlebags. She tore strips from her petticoat to make clean bandages. But it was the poultice she applied to his wound that held his flickering attention. She had gathered leaves from a hardy desert shrub he didn't recognize, chewed them into a dark, pulpy mass, and carefully packed it into and around the gunshot. It stung like foot, but then a strange, numbing coolness spread through him, pushing back the edges of the raging pain. What is that? He managed to rasp during one lucid moment. Chil gochihi, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Creosote bush. It cleans the wound, stops the bleeding. Her knowledge of the desert was profound. She found water, a small hidden seep in the rock face he never would have spotted. She brought it to him in his own canteen, holding his head up so he could drink. The water was warm and tasted of minerals, but it was the sweetest thing he'd ever tasted. She roasted a lizard over the fire, offering him small pieces of the white meat, which he struggled to chew and swallow. Their communication was sparse, a mixture of broken English-Spanish she'd picked up somewhere, and gestures. He learned her name Nita, and that the men chasing her were not lawmen. They worked for a man named Sterling, a cattle baron, who was trying to drive her people from their ancestral lands in the foothills. "Why you, Jed?" asked his voice, a dry crackle. Why, one girl, Nita's face clouded over. She looked away towards the canyon mouth, as if expecting Fletcher to reappear at any moment. She shook her head, a gesture of fear and refusal. The reason was a secret too dangerous to share with a dying Inder, a white man. Days blurred, one, maybe two. Jed's fever burned, and the nightmares returned. He saw the face of his own daughter Sarah, who had been taken by a cholera outbreak while he was away on a cattle drive. He hadn't been there to hold her, to comfort her. He had run from the grief, run from the silent accusation in Martha's eyes, and just kept running. He'd become a wanderer, a man disconnected from the world, until he saw Nita. In her desperation, he saw a chance not to erase the past, but to finally face it. Protecting her felt like the only meaningful act he had performed in a decade. During a long afternoon when the sun beat down on the rocks and the heat was a physical presence, he awoke to find her gone. Panic, cold and sharp, cut through the fever haze. He tried to push himself up, a groan of agony escaping his lips. Had she abandoned him? Had Fletcher found her? Then he saw her returning from the mouth of the canyon. She carried his Winchester rifle. Her expression was grim. "They come back," he breathed. She shook her head. "No. I watched the trail. It is clear. But—" She hesitated, her young face etched with an adult's worry. "We cannot stay. This place. It is a trap." She was right. The canyon offered cover, but it also offered only one way in and one way out. They were cornered. "My people. They are 2 days' ride from here." "Near the Weaver's Needle," she said, pointing vaguely to the northeast. "They will be looking for me. 2 days' ride." Jed looked down at his side. The poultice was working, the swelling seemed less, but the wound was still a festering mortal injury. He couldn't even stand, let alone ride. He was an anchor dragging her down. "You have to go," he said, the words costing him a monumental effort. "Take my horse. Take the rifle. Go now." Nita stared at him, her dark eyes unblinking. For a long moment, she said nothing. He saw a war being fought within her between self-preservation and the strange bond that had formed between them in blood and desperation. Finally, she shook her head with fierce finality. "You fought for me," she stated, as if it were the simplest, most undeniable truth in the world. "When I cried out, you answered. My father says a debt of blood must be paid in blood. I will not leave you to the coyotes." Before he could argue, she turned her attention to his horse. Dusty had remained close, a silent, four-legged guardian. Nita approached him cautiously, speaking in a low, soothing Apache dialect. The buckskin, usually wary of strangers, seemed to sense the girl's intent and allowed her to stroke his neck. Her plan was as desperate as it was ingenious. Using leverage and every ounce of her strength, she managed to get Jed to his feet. The world spun violently, and he would have collapsed if not for her small, strong shoulder under his arm and the solid flank of the horse on his other side. With a surge of adrenaline and a scream of pure agony that was ripped from his throat, he managed to flop belly down across the saddle. The pain was incandescent, a supernova exploding in his side. Blackness swarmed at the edges of his vision. He clung to the saddle horn, his knuckles white, his teeth grinding together to keep from passing out. Nita took Dusty's reins. She gave one last look around the small, bloody camp that had been their sanctuary. then began to lead the horse out of the canyon, away from the trap, and into the vast, dangerous wilderness. Jed, barely conscious, bounced with every step, each jolt a fresh wave of torture. He was a dead man, walking only he wasn't walking. He was being led to safety by a 12-year-old girl who refused to let him die. The irony would have made him laugh if he had the strength. Miles away in the ramshackle, sun-bleached settlement of Tortilla Flat, Fletcher slammed a half-empty bottle of whiskey onto a rough-hewn table. The liquid sloshed amber and violent. His two remaining men, Abe and a young wiry gunman named Pike, flinched. Fletcher's rage was a palpable thing, a heat that radiated off him and made the already stifling air in the saloon feel thick and suffocating. One man, Fletcher, growled, his voice a low rasp of gravel and fury. He flexed his left hand, the one that had taken the brunt of the horse's charge. It was swollen and purple. One broken-down, grey-haired saddle tramp. And he made fools of us. Abe, a nervous man, with shifting eyes, wiped his sweaty palms on his trousers. He got lucky, Fletch. And that horse, it was like a demon. "Luck don't kill," Jesse Fletcher snarled, referring to the man Jedediah had shot from his saddle. "Skill does that, and I want to know who he is." Pike, eager to prove his worth, spoke up. "I asked around. Old-timer at the livery stable recognized your description of the horse. Said a fella named Jedediah Stone rides a buckskin like that. Been working up at the Prentice place. Quiet man, keeps to himself. Been in the territory a few years." Jedediah Stone Fletcher repeated, tasting the name. It meant nothing to him. A nobody, which only made the humiliation burn hotter. And the girl, no sign of her Abe, admitted shrinking under Fletcher's glare. Or Stone. They vanished. Tracking them in that rock is damn near impossible. "Impossible for you, maybe," Fletcher said with contempt. He stood and walked to the saloon's louvered doors, pushing them open to stare out at the brutal white glare of the street. His mind was already working, dissecting the problem, not with the blind rage of a common thug, but with the cold, calculating precision that made him so valuable to his employer, Harrison Sterling. Sterling wasn't just a cattle baron. He was an empire builder. He owned the bank in Florence, had a territorial senator in his pocket, and possessed an insatiable appetite for land and water. He had purchased thousands of acres of what was considered useless desert, paying pennies for it. But Sterling knew something others didn't. He knew about the deep aquifers, the hidden springs, the lifeblood of the desert that could turn his worthless tracts into a green paradise, a kingdom. The key was a map. Not a piece of paper, but a living map. A series of songs and stories passed down through generations of a specific band of Chiricahua Apache. It was their most sacred secret, the knowledge that had allowed them to survive in a land that killed other men. And Nita, the daughter of their chief Taza, was the next in line to receive that knowledge. She had just begun learning the first of the songlines from her grandmother before the old woman died. She didn't have the whole map, but she had the beginning. And Sterling wanted it. He didn't want to ask, and he didn't want to bargain. He wanted to take it to extract the knowledge from the girl and then silence her, ensuring his monopoly on the future of the territory. Fletcher was his instrument. He was more than a foreman. He was a problem solver. He specialized in problems that couldn't be solved with contracts or court orders. "They'll be headed for her people," Fletcher said, turning back into the room. His voice was calm now. The rage banked and focused into a sharp point. The Weaver's Needle. That's their stronghold. That's Apache holy ground. Fletch. Pike said, a note of unease in his voice. Going in there is suicide. The whole tribe will be on us. We ain't going in to fight the whole tribe, you fool, Fletcher snapped. We're going to hunt. The girl is with a wounded man, a dead weight. They'll be slow. They'll have to rest. They'll leave a trail for someone who knows how to read it. He looked at his men, his eyes cold and hard. Abe, you ride to the Sterling ranch. Tell Mr. Sterling what's happened. Tell him I need 10 more men. The best he's got. Men who ain't afraid of a little blood. Tell him to meet me at the North Ridge, overlooking the Needle in 3 days. And tell him the price for the girl just went up. Abe nodded quickly, relieved to have an excuse to get away from Fletcher's temper. He scurried out of the saloon. Fletcher turned his attention to Pike. You and me, he said, we're going to find their trail. That old man is hurt bad. He's bleeding. He's leaving signs even if he don't know it. A broken branch, a scuffed rock, a drop of blood. We'll find him. He walked back to the table, picked up the whiskey bottle, and smashed it against the wall. The crash echoed through the quiet saloon. And when I find him, Fletcher whispered the promise, aimed at the empty space where Jedediah Stone should be. I'm going to take that girl right from his arms, and I'm going to make sure the last thing he ever sees is me walking away with her. He imagined the cowboy bleeding out in some lonely canyon thinking he had won. The thought filled him with a cold, predatory pleasure. The hunt was on again, and this time the wolves would have a bigger pack. The chase was no longer a simple recovery. It had become personal. It was a matter of pride, of reputation. Jedediah Stone had embarrassed him, had cost him a man and his dignity. Fletcher intended to collect that debt, with interest paid in agony and terror, under the watchful, unforgiving eye of the Arizona sun. The journey was a waking nightmare. For Jed, every step of the horse was a hammer blow to his wound. The makeshift poultice Nita had applied was a small miracle, likely the only thing keeping infection from setting in, but it couldn't mend the shredded muscle or stop the slow internal bleeding. He survived on grit and the sips of water Nita gave him. He was a passenger in his own body, his will to live reduced to a single stubborn ember, refusing to be extinguished. Nita was the true marvel. She navigated the treacherous terrain with an instinct that defied her years. She found paths that were barely visible, conserved the horses' energy, and kept a constant, wary eye on their back trail. She was no longer the terrified child from the canyon. She was a survivor, a daughter of the desert, drawing strength from the harsh land that was her home. On the evening of the second day, as the sun bled crimson and gold across the horizon, painting the jagged silhouette of the Weaver's Needle in stark relief, they were found. They came not with a shout, but like ghosts. One moment, the landscape was empty. The next 5 Apache warriors were there, materializing from the rocks and saguaros. They were mounted on wiry ponies, their faces grim, their rifles held at the ready. Their leader, a powerfully built man with a fierce hawk-like face and a long scar that cut across one cheek, raised a hand. His eyes, dark and hard as obsidian, took in the scene. The exhausted girl, the wounded white man, slumped over a stolen-looking horse, the Winchester rifle in Nita's hands. His gaze lingered on Jed with open hostility. "Nita," he said, his voice sharp with a mixture of relief and anger. He was Goya, her uncle brother, to the chief. Nita rushed forward, a torrent of Apache words pouring from her. She pointed back the way they came, then to Jed, her gestures frantic and pleading. Goya dismounted and strode towards her, ignoring Jed completely for the moment. He listened, his expression unchanging. His hand never straying far from the hilt of the knife on his belt. The other warriors fanned out their rifles, still trained on Jed. For all his pain and fever, Jed understood the precariousness of his situation. He had been found by the very people he had, in a way, been trying to reach. And they looked at him not as a savior, but as a predator, a Pindalikoi, a white-eyed enemy found with one of their own. Jed summoned what little strength he had and pushed himself upright in the saddle. The movement sent a bolt of pure agony through him, and a low groan escaped his lips. He had to show them he wasn't just a passive victim. He had to meet their eyes. Goya finished listening to Nita. He turned his unforgiving gaze back to Jed. "You are the one who did this?" he asked in rough Spanish, gesturing to Jed's bloody side. "No." Jed rasped, his own Spanish thick with a Texas drawl. "I was shot by the men who were chasing her." Goya's eyes narrowed in disbelief. "White men do not fight white men to save an Apache. You lie." "He does not lie," Nita insisted, stepping between her uncle and Jed. "3 men. They would have killed me." "He killed one of them. He fought for me." One of the other warriors let out a skeptical grunt. "He is a white man. They are all treacherous. This is a trick." Goya looked from Nita's passionate, pleading face to Jed's pale, sweat-soaked one. He was torn. His heart wanted to believe his niece, but his experience, a lifetime of broken treaties, stolen land, and violence, screamed that this was a trap. "We will take you to Taza," Goya declared finally. "He will decide what truth your tongue speaks." 2 warriors dismounted and approached Jed roughly. They pulled him from the saddle, heedless of his injury. The pain was so intense that the world went white and his legs buckled. They dragged him a few feet before Nita's furious cry stopped them. "Stop. You will kill him. He is wounded." Goya watched his face a stony mask as Nita knelt beside Jed. Placing a hand on his shoulder in a clear gesture of protection. This small act of defiance from the girl gave him pause. Nita was his chief's daughter. Her word and her bond carried weight. He gave a curt nod, and the warriors backed away. They were still hostile, but they would wait for the chief's judgment. The Apache camp was nestled in a hidden basin, protected by sheer rock walls, and accessible only by a single, easily defended trail. It was a place of stark beauty, with ancient saguaros standing like silent sentinels. As they entered the camp, faces peered out from wickiups, the dome-shaped huts of willow branches and hides. A murmur rippled through the community. The sight of a wounded white man being brought in as a prisoner was an event. They brought him to the center of the camp, where a fire burned low. A man emerged from the largest wickiup. He was older than Goya, with a face that was a road map of wisdom and sorrow. His hair was streaked with gray, and he carried himself with a quiet authority that required no shouting. This was Taza, the chief Nita's father. Taza's eyes, unlike his brother's, were not filled with fire, but with a deep, penetrating weariness. He looked at his daughter, his expression softening with immense relief and love. He embraced her tightly. Then he turned his gaze to Jed, who now lay propped against a saddle on the ground, fighting to stay conscious. "Father," Nita said, her voice clear and strong. "This man's name is Jedediah Stone. He saved my life." Taza knelt, his knees cracking. He looked closely at Jed's face, then at the crude, blood-soaked bandage on his side. He saw the pain in Jed's eyes, but he also saw something else, a lack of fear and acceptance. It was the look of a man who had already made his peace with dying. "Goya says you claim to have been shot by other white men." Taza said, his Spanish more refined than his brother's. "It is the truth," Jed breathed. "Why?" Taza asked the simple question, cutting to the heart of the matter. "Why would you do this?" "We are not your people." Jed's gaze drifted past the chief to the faces of the Apache gathered around women. Children, old men, all watching him with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. His own past rose up to meet him, the ghosts of Sand Creek, the face of his lost daughter. "I owed a debt." Jed whispered, his voice so low that Taza had to lean in to hear. "Not to you, to myself." The answer was cryptic, honest, and utterly confusing to the Apache chief. Before Taza could ask another question, Goya stepped forward, his anger barely contained. "He is a poison brother. He brings Fletcher and his dogs to our very home. We should kill him now and leave his body for the vultures. It is the only way to be sure we are safe." A murmur of agreement went through some of the warriors. The situation was balanced on a knife's edge. Jed's life hung by the thread of a chief's decision in a camp of people who had every reason in the world to hate him. Taza stood, his face unreadable in the flickering firelight, and looked down at the bleeding, broken white man who had brought his daughter home. The judgment was yet to be passed. The air in the chief's wickiup was thick with the scent of wood smoke, herbs, and tension. Taza sat on a pile of buffalo robes, his face impassive as a rock carving. Across from him sat his brother, Goya, his arms crossed, radiating impatience and hostility. The tribe's shaman, an ancient man called Geronimo, not the famed warrior, but an elder who shared the name, sat silently in the corner, his eyes closed. Nita knelt beside her father, her hand resting on his knee. Jed had been moved inside, laid on a clean blanket. The shaman had examined his wound, his touch surprisingly gentle. He had cleaned it with a bitter-smelling solution and applied a new, more potent poultice of crushed roots and clay, but his grave expression offered little hope. The bullet was still inside, and the fever was rising. "Now," Taza said, his voice a low rumble. "Tell me everything. From the beginning." All eyes went to Nita. She took a deep breath, her young voice filling the small space. She spoke in her native Chiricahua tongue, her words painting a vivid picture. She told of her grandmother's recent death and of the secret duty that had passed to her. It was not a map on paper, she explained, but a ayah, a sacred path of knowledge preserved in song. "It is the song of the hidden waters," she said. "It tells of the secret places, the springs that never fail the life of our people when the sun burns the world. Grandmother sang me the first verse before the spirits took her, the verse of the western canyons." Goya shifted uncomfortably. This was sacred knowledge, not to be spoken of lightly, especially with an outsider present, dying or not. Nita continued explaining how Fletcher and his men had first tried to bargain, offering trinkets and then money for her to guide them. When she refused, they had tried to take her. She had fled, and the chase had begun. She recounted the events in the canyon, her voice trembling slightly as she described Jed's sudden appearance, his calm defiance, the shocking explosion of violence. "He did not hesitate," Nita said, looking directly at Jed's still form. "He saw 3 men against 1 girl, and he chose the girl. His blood was spilled for mine." Taza listened without interruption, his gaze fixed on his daughter. When she finished, the wickiup was silent, save for Jed's shallow, ragged breathing. "A song?" Goya scoffed, switching to Spanish for Jed's benefit. "Sterling and his dog Fletcher are tearing our land apart for a song." "It is more than a song, brother," Taza corrected him gently. "It is our future. In a dry time, it is the difference between life and death. Sterling is a shrewd man. He does not want the land as it is. He wants it as it could be. With our water, his worthless desert becomes a kingdom." He turned his piercing gaze back to Jed. "And you, the dying cowboy. What is your part in this? Why were you there? No man is simply passing through the devil's backbone." Jed's eyes fluttered open. The fever gave them a glassy, otherworldly sheen. He licked his cracked lips. "Looking for strays," he rasped. "Prentice Ranch." He paused, gathering his strength. He knew this was his only chance to be understood, not just to save his own life, a prospect that seemed increasingly remote, but to validate Nita's faith in him. "I saw them chasing her." He continued, his voice thin but clear. I've seen things like that before. Men who think their power gives them the right to hunt people." His gaze became distant, unfocused, as he looked inward into the past he had run from for so long. "Long time ago," he began, the words coming slowly, painfully. "I was a scout, younger and a fool. I rode with men who wore blue coats. We were told we were punishing warriors who had raided settlements. But when we got to the camp, there were no warriors. Only old men, women, children." Goya leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. He knew the stories. Every tribe knew them. Sand Creek, the Washita River. "We were told to fire," Jed whispered, a tigger of sweat or sorrow tracing a path through the grime on his temple. "I didn't. I swear to God I never raised my rifle. But I stayed. I watched. My silence was my sin. I watched them slaughter people who had been promised peace." He choked on the memory. "I saw a girl, about her age." He gestured weakly towards Nita. "She ran. A soldier on a big bay horse. He ran her down." The air in the wickiup grew heavy, charged with the weight of his confession. He wasn't just a random cowboy. He was a witness, a participant in one of their deepest historical traumas. "After that I left. Couldn't stand the sight of the uniform anymore. Tried to build a life, had a wife, a daughter." The word daughter caught in his throat. Her name was Sarah. She was 7 when the cholera took her. I was away, always away, running from what I'd seen, from what I was. I wasn't there for her. He finally looked at Taza, his eyes filled with a profound, soul-deep agony. "When I saw those men chasing your daughter, I saw him, the soldier on the bay horse, and I saw Sarah running. I couldn't save my own daughter. God forgive me, I couldn't save her. But I could try to save yours." Silence. A thick, profound silence fell over the wickiup. Goya stared at Jed, his raw hatred replaced by a stunned, complex understanding. This man's motive wasn't heroism, it was atonement. He wasn't trying to be a white savior. He was trying to quiet a demon that had chased him for 20 years. Nita, who had understood the Spanish, began quietly translating for the shaman, her voice soft. Taza's expression had lost all its hardness. He saw not a white man, an enemy, but simply a man stripped bare to his soul, laid low by his past, and a bullet from the present. a father who had lost a child and tried to save another's. It was a truth that transcended the boundaries of race and hatred. It was a truth of the heart. "You have spoken with a straight tongue," Taza said, his voice imbued with a new gravity. He placed a hand on his daughter's head. "You have brought a strange man to our home, Nita, a man with a heavy spirit." He rose and looked down at Jed. "Your fight is now our fight. Fletcher will not have the song of the hidden waters, and he will not have the man who bled for its keeper." He turned to his brother. "Goya, post sentries on every ridge. Send scouts to watch Fletcher's movements. He will come for the girl. When he does, we will be waiting." Goya stood. He looked at Jed, then at his chief. For the first time, he gave a slow, deliberate nod of agreement. The judgment had been passed. The tribe was now bound to the fate of the dying cowboy, not by force, but by the undeniable weight of his truth. Jedediah Stone had finally stopped running. He had found his last stand not in a lonely canyon, but in the heart of his former enemies. The attack came with the false dawn, not with a wild charge, but with the quiet, deadly efficiency of a coordinated assault. Fletcher was no fool. He knew a frontal attack on the Apache stronghold was suicide. So he didn't attack the camp itself. He attacked the sentries. Harrison Sterling had provided the men. Fletcher requested a dozen hard cases mercenaries and ex-soldiers who shot first and never asked questions. Fletcher had split them into 3 teams. Under the cover of pre-dawn darkness, they had scaled the cliffs surrounding the basin, silent predators taking their positions. The first sign of trouble was a single muffled shot, followed by an eerie silence where a sentry's call should have been. Goya, ever vigilant, heard it. He let out a sharp cry, a hawk's screech that echoed through the waking camp. It was the signal for an attack. Instantly, the peaceful basin erupted into a maelstrom of controlled chaos. Warriors poured from their wiki-ups, grabbing rifles and bows, their movements fluid and practiced. Women herded the children towards the most defensible caves at the rear of the camp. Jed was awake. The fever had him in its grip, and he drifted in and out of a delirious state, but the sound of the shot cut through the haze like a knife. He pushed himself up on one elbow, his head spinning. Taza was instantly by his side, pressing him back down. "Your fight is over, Jedediah Stone," the chief said, his voice grim, as he grabbed his own rifle. "No," Jed rasped, his voice a dry whisper. "Give me my rifle." Taza hesitated, then saw the look in the cowboy's eyes. It was a fire that refused to be quenched. He nodded to Nita, who scrambled to retrieve Jed's Winchester from the corner of the wiki-up. Her hands trembled as she handed it to him, along with a box of cartridges. "They'll come for her," Jed breathed, chambering around with a familiar, comforting click. "They'll try to create chaos and snatch her." Taza realized the white man's tactical assessment was likely correct. This wasn't a battle of annihilation. It was a raid. "Goya!" he yelled, and his brother appeared at the wiki-up's entrance, his face painted for war. "The girl. They will try to take Nita. Keep her safe." Goya nodded, his eyes blazing. He grabbed Nita's arm and pulled her towards the back of the dwelling, to a hidden exit that led towards the caves. The basin was now a killing field. Fletcher's men, positioned high above, had clear fields of fire. Puffs of smoke bloomed from the rocks, followed by the crack of rifles and the whine of ricochets. The Apache warriors were masters of their own terrain, using every rock and crevice for cover. But they were pinned down, unable to mount a charge against the unseen enemy. From his position lying at the entrance of the chief's wiki-up, Jed had a limited but crucial vantage point. He could see the eastern ridge, the one closest to the path leading out of the basin. Through the swirling dust and smoke, he saw movement. A small group of Sterling's men, 4 of them, were breaking from cover, running low and heading not towards the main fight, but towards the rear of the camp. Towards the caves. They were the snatch team. "Taza," Jed croaked, pointing with the barrel of his rifle. "There. They're flanking. Going for the caves." Taza followed his gaze and swore. He raised his rifle to fire, but the range was long and the targets were moving fast. His shot kicked up dust behind them. Jed took a deep, shuddering breath. He rested the Winchester on a rolled-up blanket Nita had left behind, creating a stable platform. He tried to ignore the fire in his side, the black spots dancing in his vision. He became what he had been for 20 years. A man alone with his rifle. He let out half a breath, his training taking over. He found the lead man in his sights, a big fellow running with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. He squeezed the trigger. The Winchester bucked against his shoulder. Far up the slope, the man stumbled, clutching his leg, and went down in a heap. The other 3 faltered, surprised by the accurate fire from an unexpected quarter. They dove for cover behind a cluster of boulders. A small victory, but a vital one. He had stalled their advance. The battle raged. Goya and his warriors laid down a furious volley of fire, forcing Fletcher's main force to keep their heads down. But the pressure was immense. 2 Apache warriors lay still, cut down in the crossfire. Then Jed saw him. Fletcher. He was on a high ledge to the north, directing his men, pointing. And he was looking directly at Taza, who was moving between positions, trying to rally his warriors for a counter-assault. Fletcher raised his own Spencer rifle, the same one he'd used to shoot Jed. He was taking aim at the chief. There was no time to shout a warning. Jed shifted his aim, his body screaming in protest. The world narrowed to the V of his rear sight, the bead of his front sight, and the figure of the man who had become the source of all this misery. He knew he only had one shot. The strain was causing the wound in his side to tear a fresh, hot wetness spreading across his shirt. He fired. The recoil was a physical blow that sent a wave of blackness over him. But he saw it. On the ledge, Fletcher jerked back as if punched. He didn't fall, but his shot went wild, ploughing into the dirt, harmlessly yards from Taza. Fletcher staggered back, clutching his shoulder, his face a mask of shocked rage as he disappeared behind the rock face. That shot changed everything. Seeing their leader hit the momentum of the attackers faltered. Taza, realizing what had just happened, saw his chance. He let out a thunderous war cry and charged forward, his warriors rising with him like a wave. They were no longer pinned down. They were the attackers, swarming up the rocks towards their foes' positions. The fight turned. Faced with a ferocious, vengeful charge on their home ground, Sterling's men broke. Those who could fled, scrambling back over the ridges they had so stealthily climbed. Goya and his warriors pursued them with a relentless fury, their victory cries echoing through the basin. The battle was won. Back in the wickiup, Jed lay in a pool of his own blood, the Winchester still clutched in his hands. The last desperate act of defiance had cost him everything. The world was fading, the sounds of victory growing distant and muted. Nita, who had crept back from the caves, knelt beside him, tears streaming down her face. She tried to put pressure on the fresh wound, but it was no use. The dam had broken. Taza returned, his face grim. He knelt, taking in the scene. He looked from Jed's pale, dying face to the ridge where Fletcher had been. He understood the sacrifice that had been made. The cowboy, with his last ounce of strength, had saved the chief's life. He had saved them all. The battle for the Red Rocks was over. But for Jedediah Stone, the final battle, the one for his last breath, had just begun. The sounds of victory faded, replaced by the somber quiet inside the chief's wickiup. A sacred space had formed around the dying cowboy. The shaman had already seen that medicine was useless. The final desperate shots from the Winchester had cost Jedediah everything. The fever was gone, replaced by the profound, spreading cold of a life coming to its end. He lay propped against Tarza's saddle, his breathing a soft whisper. Tarza sat beside him, a silent guardian. Nita knelt on his other side, her small hand clutching his, her face a mask of solemn grief. Through the wickiup's opening, the sky bled into the deep oranges and purples of sunset. Fletcher. Jed breathed the name, a faint rustle. Gone. Tarza confirmed, his voice low. Your shot broke him and his men. You have saved us. Jed's gaze found Nita. He managed a weak smile. You're safe now, little one. Your song is safe. Your name will be part of the song now. Nita whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. Jedediah Stone, the one who answered. We will remember. To be remembered not as a failure, but as a protector. It was more than he could have hoped for. His tired eyes met Tarza's, holding a final pleading question. My daughter, Sarah, did I do right by her? Tarza, the chief, who had every reason to hate Jed's kind, saw only a father seeking peace. He placed a firm, respectful hand on Jed's shoulder. A father's love is a sacred fire, he said with ancient authority. Your fire burned brightly today, Jedediah Stone. Your daughter would be proud. The words were a balm on a soul that had been wounded for 2 decades. The guilt, the ghosts, the running, it all finally settled. He looked towards the brilliant colors of the fading sun. So beautiful, he whispered, a look of profound peace smoothing the lines of pain from his face. Sarah, I'm coming home. His eyes closed. His hand went limp in Nita's grasp, and with one last gentle breath, he was gone. The Apache did not bury him as an enemy. By order of the chief, they wrapped him in a new blanket of honor. They built a burial scaffold high on a wind-swept mesa, laying him to rest with his Winchester by his side, facing the dawn he had given them. He had come to their land a stranger haunted by his past, and he left it a legend. His final act, a testament that even in the harshest of lands, a man could find his redemption. The story of Jedediah Stone isn't just a tale of guns and dust. It's a testament to the enduring power of redemption, a reminder that our past does not have to be our final destination. In an age of conflict and division, Jed's sacrifice for Nita builds a bridge between 2 worlds, proving that honor and courage are a language understood by all. It shows that even in the face of certain death, a single act of selfless bravery can change the course of history, and its echo can be heard for generations in the whispered legends of the West. If the story of Jedediah's last stand and Nita's unshakable courage moved you, help us keep these powerful tales alive. Please take a moment to hit that like button. Share this video with someone who appreciates a story with real heart, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more journeys into the untamed heart of the Wild West.